Good afternoon. While we have the panelists coming up, perhaps I could say a couple of words ahead of this discussion. We'll have a change of topic, moving to M&A and licensing in rare diseases in the orphan space from the previous three discussions this afternoon around the regulatory landscape. As Chris very nicely alluded to this morning, the rare disease space has evolved to become one of the gems of the broader biotech and the biopharmaceutical industry, in a sense. And this current decade is going to be, a significant area of opportunity in rare diseases, and we'll talk about some of the activities that are happening there and how to drive innovation in this space with new technologies, new drug delivery approaches, as well as new therapeutics. And as everyone has followed the news over the past few days, as you're aware, there are really broad headwinds as well as tailwinds behind the industry. Going forward, business models are changing rapidly, pressures are increasing in different ways, and opportunities are being provided in new ways. And part of that is the interaction between big and small companies through licensing new technologies or acquisitions that drive this industry forward. With me on this panel, we have a very distinguished panel of business development, strategy, and R&D executives joining us today. And I'll take a minute to introduce them to you before we sort of dive into the topics of discussion that we have lined up for you. And over the next 30 minutes, hopefully we'll have a really engaging discussion. And if there's any time at the end, perhaps we can open it up for a conversation with the audience. We have Mark Barrett joining us today. Mark sitting at the very end of the panel. Mark is VP and Head of Strategy and Business Development at Genzyme in rare diseases. He joined Genzyme in July of 2013, and his team is responsible for development of strategy as well as partnering and acquisition activities for Genzyme's rare diseases as well as their R&D units in rare disease. Tom Kasberg is the Chief Business Officer of Ultragenyx. Tom joined Ultragenyx about 3 years ago in November of 2011. He is responsible for leading the company's business development as well as many other operations, including corporate strategic planning activities. My good friend Alvin Shih from Pfizer Rare Diseases is here. Alvin is the Chief Operating Officer of the Rare Diseases Research Unit at Pfizer. He was one of the founding members of this research unit in 2010, joining Pfizer. He currently serves as the group's Chief Operating Officer responsible for strategy as well as managing operations within this R&D unit. And my own colleague from Shire, Brian Fenton, who is Senior Director of Business Development Transactions in Rare Diseases at Shire, is also on the panel. So as we sort of try to prepare for this panel and thinking about some of the key hot topic issues to discuss today, one of the broadest areas of interest, especially from the small company perspective, as companies try to partner or out-license their technologies to bigger partner companies, to the buyers within the industry, one of the key things is beyond the broader mandates of corporate strategy within each of those organizations, how does project selection actually take place within these companies? And by that I mean selection and prioritization of various business development opportunities and assets as they try to line them up against their broader corporate strategy in rare diseases. And within those particular disease areas or therapeutic areas that they have identified as important to them, how do they prioritize and pick and choose various business development opportunities to go after? So I'd like to open that up to the panel, particularly to Mark, to give us a perspective from the Genzyme side of the business, and then perhaps move on to Alvin to give us the perspective from Pfizer. Mark?
Sure, thanks for the introductions. Microphone?
Swap.
Sure. Thanks. Collaboration right here on the stage. So, at Genzyme, our prioritization and focus in business development is on trying to develop transformative therapies for significant unmet needs in rare diseases. And so that's the basis of what we're looking for when we're thinking about priorities. And so we focus on the biology and the science that underlies a particular opportunity and the patient need, and can we develop a product for that particular patient group. And so we think a lot about the science and the biology, the pathophysiology behind a particular disease. Is it well understood? Is it robustly credentialed such that one can think about a particular genetic defect, mechanism of action, molecular target, and understand that well, and understand how a particular drug intervenes given that biological understanding, and then think about the potential for development and success of that agent to address that disease. And so really biology and science and the understanding of those areas is critical in the way we review opportunities and prioritize the ones that we think are most compelling to pursue from a business development standpoint. And then along with that, we think carefully about the clinical and patient unmet need that exists around that particular disease. Do we understand the patient population? Do we know how big it is? Can we learn how big it is? Do we understand the disease? And as some of the speakers already today have said, do we understand what those patients really consider to be the significant manifestations of the disease? And can we address those with that drug, understanding the biology that we know about the particular compound or molecule? And so we put all those things together to try and build a business case that for the products that we prioritize, we can understand the science, understand the patient population, the natural history of the disease, how we can intervene, what we can study in a clinical study, and hopefully convince regulators that our product is compelling to review and approve and get to the market and see a compelling business case. From our standpoint, we don't think about minimum patient numbers that are required in a population to be compelling for us. We just think about the science and understanding the magnitude of the unmet need for patients. And if we can understand those things and we have a good basis to believe that a particular therapy can be compelling to address those needs, then that's something we can be interested in.
Alvin?
I'll switch back with you. Thank you. Glad to be here. I always find myself on these panels as the big pharma whipping boy. But I will point out that I'm the only stiff up here not wearing a tie, and so you can't teach old dogs new tricks. But I agree with everything Mark has said. The way we think about prioritizing BD opportunities at Pfizer, and I speak as an R&D person, not as a BD transactionalist, but the way we think about it is how does it align with our overall rare disease direction and goals, and how does BD then enable those particular goals? So at Pfizer, we have done a very systematic review of the rare disease landscape and come up with several therapeutic areas within rare disease that meet many of the criteria that Mark just described. So for us, some of the things that bubble to the top are hematologic diseases. Among those, hemophilia and sickle cell disease are the ones that we've chosen to focus on. Neuromuscular disorders, like Duchenne muscular dystrophy and spinal muscular atrophy. And then pulmonary disorders like cystic fibrosis and pulmonary arterial hypertension. So those are our key disease area focuses that you may have seen this morning that Bruce highlighted. And we look for BD to fill strategic gaps within those priorities. So as an example of that, the glycomimetics in-license that happened in 2010 was to fill a discrete gap in our sickle cell disease portfolio. And that's now become a cornerstone of that franchise for us. Similarly, the Repligen deal that was also announced a couple of years ago was intended to fill the gap in spinal muscular atrophy, which is a disease area we felt very compelled to be in. The second goal that we have in BD is to extend even beyond those 6 disease areas or 3 therapeutic areas to go into near adjacencies and areas that we feel could be promising new technologies. And an example of that is the deal that we announced with a small company called Glicnic about 6 months ago, and that's for a recombinant IgG Fc fusion protein that could potentially address some of the rare neuromuscular and hematologic diseases that are currently addressed by IVIG. So that was an example where we were opportunistic. We felt like this was a place where we could have a therapy that would apply to multiple of our disease areas of focuses and really take us into a new space. So that's kind of how we think about it. We intend on being very active in the BD space and welcome the opportunity to talk with you all.
So Alvin, I'm not sure if this mic is on or if I need to speak here. If I take all of that, as well as what Mark described, as well as what Brian and I always deal with at Shire and our own past prior experiences, I think one of the key important things for those in the audience who are looking to partner or out-license their particular assets to the buyer companies, even though there may be an incredible fit with a particular therapeutic area that is of focus, portfolio decisions come in play, as well as other opportunistic endeavors that at any given time may shift the priorities within the organization for an in-licensing decision. Would you agree with that?
I would. I think that's a reality of the business. And again, that's why it makes sense to do due diligence up front, understand how your particular product would fit into the portfolio. As I mentioned, something like glycomimetics for us was really a first step to go into sickle cell. We have a company priority to be in that space, and so we're going to continue to invest in that. The second deal after that necessarily has to fold in and make sense in the context of that first deal.
Right.
And so it's always a matter of trying to figure out where your therapy fits in.
One of the recent trends in the industry, the broader biopharmaceutical industry over the past few years, has been deals where the economics is loaded towards the back end with a lot of options for the acquirers or the buyers of these technologies to minimize their risk. Brian, I'm going to look up to you to perhaps talk about some of these innovative deal structures for us in terms of how the innovation within the deal structuring space, particularly in rare diseases, is changing and has evolved in terms of collaborative efforts with venture capital companies, with academia, smaller biotechs, as well as within bigger companies, and how you see this world of innovative deal structures.
Yeah, so thanks, Sam. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. In my past 2+ years at Shire, I've had the opportunity to be on a number of, part of the team on a number of innovative deals of varying complexity. I think just highlighting two in particular, kind of different ends of the spectrum in terms of the structure, but nevertheless, I think achieve some of the innovativeness that you kind of referenced, Sam. The first one we announced at the end of 2012 with Boston Children's Hospital. It's a broad three-year research agreement with the hospital, and basically focused on developing therapies for rare pediatric diseases of high unmet need. Under the terms of the agreement, Shire has the ability to fund the research programs through kind of we believe to be the special secret sauce is an open, innovative crowdsourcing mechanism where the PIs of the hospital can submit their ideas for new therapies to a joint development committee, which then reviews the proposals, and at which point Shire has the opportunity to fund a given research program and retains the exclusive option to license the program for further development. I mean, I think on the face of it, it's a pretty simple, straightforward structure, but like I mentioned, the ability to provide this open forum with very little restriction on thoughts, restrictions on criteria, enables the PIs to leverage their unique experience and knowledge of their patients to develop new therapies. And as evidenced, just in a year or so since the collaboration, we've already selected two programs, one of which provides a novel target in an area of interest for Shire, and one which is in a totally new disease area that we would not have even thought of for both programs, or even thought possible, but for this open source model. And the second example, I think, is a little over a year ago, through our collaboration with Atlas Ventures, we and our portfolio company, Nimbus Discovery. The deal is focused on developing small molecule therapeutics, or a small, potential first-in-class small molecule therapeutic for multiple lysosomal storage diseases. And Nimbus Discovery is a very interesting company with a novel platform that to develop therapeutics against traditionally difficult disease targets. And this is a very heavily, on the other side of the spectrum, very heavily structured deal with a dedicated program that's set up through a dedicated subsidiary set up by Nimbus Discovery, in which the subsidiary has total sole decision-making authority up to the development candidate stage, at which point Shire has an option to acquire the program via acquisition of this dedicated subsidiary. And it's just another example, I think, in an area of a dedicated program where you retain that optionality and leverage each respective company's area of expertise with this sole decision-making authority.
Thanks, Brian. And Tom, from your perspective, from the small rare disease company side that just recently went public through the open financing window and is potentially sometime down the road looking to partner, I'm not sure, but from your perspective, how do you see this innovative deal structuring mechanism work?
Sure.
That would be great to hear.
Let's make sure, is that it's working? Yeah, so we're, I feel a little bit unique here, the smaller of the three, like my colleagues here, but we're a 4-year-old company. We've built our pipeline today. We have 5 programs in phase 2, all through licensing, essentially. There's one program I'm going to talk about. I think it falls in the innovative category in particular. With respect to the licensing we've done, it's been primarily academic groups where we've seen some interesting work that maybe requires a translational step. That's kind of our sweet spot, looking for something that we can pick up, do some translational work, whatever needs to happen to take a great idea, make it to more drug-like, and take it to the clinic. So that is a model definitely we like. I think that's one that we're all looking at necessarily innovative. There are some option aspects that we incorporate into some of those licenses. Some of them have other indications, sometimes larger market indications that we as a small company can't commit to, but we try to control that through some optionality later on. But one example that I wanted to give, first of all, our core expertise that I think we can offer partners as an in-licenser is we're small and nimble. And we have, I think, particular expertise in the regulatory strategy development side of things, and then being able to put small dedicated teams. So we've had some discussions and brought one deal to conclusion last year with a larger company where they had, this was Kyohako Kirin had a product, a monoclonal antibody for XLH. It's a heritable form of rickets, about 12,000 patients in the US. A serious disease, unmet need, really no approved therapies. They had been in phase 1 and phase 1/2 studies in adults, weren't sure how to bring it to the pediatric setting where the real need is. And basically, we learned about this program, approached them and said, look, we can help you here. This is our expertise to move this forward, particularly in the pediatric indication. Initially, I'm not sure how seriously they took us because they were talking to some other larger companies about just licensing out the program. Anyway, we were able to kind of win them over largely by, we had to tell them how we develop it, which was, there's some risk to us. We had to kind of lay out our ideas on how to develop this. Ultimately, that resonated and that sort of brought us together in a more serious discussion. And we ended up doing a deal that we think is very good for Ultragenyx. It's good for Kyohako Kirin, and hopefully good for patients, where we took over development of that program for US and Europe. So we're now leading development. We're taking it to the pediatric setting later this year. We cost share those studies on a certain ratio based on territory. And then KHK had wanted to keep some commercial ownership of the product, so that's where it got complicated. So we ended up doing, again, as a small company, we could be flexible. We would have preferred just to license the asset, but this is kind of what we had to do to work with them. So we ended up with a 50-50 profit share in the US, but we lead commercialization. We'll launch the product, but we share profit. South America is a territory that we have, so we launch in South America. That's our territory. And then in Europe, we provide the regulatory approval, but KHK will launch the product. And then we collaborate and cooperate across that. So it was a challenging deal to work on, but I think one that's innovative, and I think probably from the smaller company perspective, the kind of flexibility you have to display in some of these things to effectively compete for clinical stage assets in particular. I think it's a more even playing field perhaps on earlier stage opportunities. But so that was an interesting one I mentioned, and something that we think we would do again. We think that was a win-win deal.
Right, great, thanks. I'm going to shift the focus. I'll come back to you, Tom, in just a second with this new topic. But I want to look at Mark and ask him about the notion of determining valuations in various business development deals. between the two parties. So we operate in an environment in rare diseases where for many of these diseases with significant unmet needs, there are absolutely no therapies, no analogs to refer back to. And obviously, overall global healthcare budgets are under significant pressure, and reimbursement pressures going forward are to be felt. In fact, they're being felt already. So the question is, Mark, from your perspective and at Genzyme, how does one go through valuing a potential BD opportunity on both sides of the table, given these unknowns? How reimbursement and market access is going to play out by the time this product reaches the market, as well as lack of any analogs, perhaps to compare it to in a given disease. How do you guys view this?
Sure. So, happy to share our thoughts, and like to hear your thoughts too on that. I know you spent a lot of time thinking about it. But so Genzyme obviously has been in a very favorable position over many years in the rare disease space. We've been very successful with this business and been a leader in the space. And so we have a lot of capability and expertise upon which we can rely when thinking about new opportunities. And so, generally we take an approach to think creatively about what the disease is. Again, it comes back to some of the same items that I mentioned earlier. Understanding the science, understanding the population of patients, understanding the value that a therapeutic can deliver by addressing an unmet need, and thinking about that in the context of our experience. And I think one of the reasons that Genzyme has been successful through its partnerships historically and continues to be a desirable partner for smaller organizations looking for a bigger partner more with resources is that we have that long track record of success. So we rely upon those experiences that have helped us learn about the rare disease space, how to create value, how to work with governments and payers, get therapies to patients around the world through our global infrastructure, both from a development and R&D point of view and from a commercial standpoint. So we take inputs from all of those different aspects of our business and think about it in various ways. We think about, what is the alternative therapy, if any, for patients who have a particular disease, and what kind of costs or challenges would they encounter if they didn't have a therapeutic like the one that we're developing? How many patients are there? What are analog, if any, products that are out there, or therapies that are out there? And what's the cost to the healthcare system of the patient if they're untreated, and what can our therapy do to perhaps mitigate some of those costs? So it's a multifactorial analysis, but eventually all of that, we build it into a typical business model, business case for a particular opportunity, and try and value the asset, the product, the company on that basis. And so we of course do that, think about all the other things that business development folks like us think about, comparable deals, value of other companies working in the space, all those sorts of different approaches you can take to valuation. But we try and do that in a collaborative way with our partners in the discussion. We don't just go into our corner and work and then come to the table and negotiate, but we very much try and be a flexible partner in our business development dealings and negotiations with other parties. And I think that's probably represented well in the collaboration that we announced early this year with Alnylam, which is an expansion of our relationship. And that was a very collaborative interaction that we had with the company to understand their needs, the way they valued the products and the technologies, the way we thought about the potential relationship, and how we valued the things that were being brought to the collaboration by Alnylam. And so, at the end, we wound up with a deal structure that I think adds a lot of value for both companies and creates a lot of opportunity for both of us. And so, we'll take that kind of integrated, flexible approach as we're thinking about partnering with biotech companies around their therapeutics.
Right, and I'm fully aware that there are never 100%, all the questions are never 100% answered in those types of evaluations, and there's always a gray area in terms of an 80-20 or a 90-10 answer on both sides. So that kind of collaborative negotiation, I think, certainly goes a long way. Tom, what are your perspectives on that, and how do you see that world?
Yeah, I think it's, in many ways it's very similar. I think, but some of the challenges we have as a small company is just we don't have the access to the in-house resources necessarily, where you could get real market input from Europe or from your teams on the ground in terms of pricing, reimbursement. But that said, I think in some ways, compared to other therapeutic areas I've worked in, rare diseases, at least if you're working on a disease where there is no competition or it's a non-therapeutic competition, I think in some ways it's a little bit easier. You fall back on the value that you're delivering as the product a lot more. And then you certainly, we don't have to work out, market share against a competitor, that there's the symptomatic care, it's a little more straightforward, at least in the areas we're working in where it's unmet need. We would be the first therapy into that market. In some ways, that's a little more straightforward. The pricing piece is challenging, but the way we think about it in making any kind of decision on a program is we run it at a very sort of modest level. We assume that we can deliver a particular level of value, and then we think about that in terms of the investment that we make. We spend a lot of time on the development costs, the plan, and the amount of time that all factors into your analysis. And then the pricing, we look at comps and we look at the value, and we tend to fall on the modest end of that. And then if all that works through, that's often very supportive at the end in making our decision. But I think, to your point, Mark, earlier, I think for us as well, it's really driven by the unmet need. I think if the unmet need is high and you have a great therapy, that's something we'll do, whether it's 200 patients in one case with MPS 7 potentially, or something larger.
Right. So as I get the nod from Chris, I'm looking at Andre. The clock here still shows 20 minutes, but my guess is we're very short on time, if not almost done. I'll just very quickly look around the panel and perhaps ask about the competitive pressures. So as big pharma pipelines have dried up, similar to oncology, that was the sort of the golden goose some 10, 15, 20 years ago where everybody rushed into. Now we've seen a big rush into the orphan space. And that's really raised the level of competition for novel, innovative assets in this space from a business development and licensing as well as M&A perspective. So my question to the panel from different size companies within the industry is, how do they see this competitive pressure, and what are their predictions for 2014 and beyond? Alvin, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So I completely concur that there's been a lot more competitive intensity. And I think that manifests itself in at least two ways from my vantage point. So the first is that there's been a shift in the balance of power, and there's been a lot more blurring of the lines between buyers and sellers. And what I mean is that even 5 years ago, the conversations were very different. They started out as, what can you bring to the table, and what can you do to help us enhance our pipeline? Now, it's very common for us to really start our discussions with what we can bring to the table. And saying we're Pfizer is not enough. That's actually a negative in some ways. So we've had to be very clear about saying that we are able to bring X, Y, and Z capabilities to the table to really help get this therapy to market and to the patients that need it. So that's the first thing. There's really been a shift in the balance of power. The second thing is that we're going earlier. So, and I know this has already been mentioned, but if I just look at the way our deal flow has evolved over the last several years, in the 2009 to 2011 timeframe, all of our deals were in the late stage space, or products that were already pretty close to registration. The deals that we've done over the last couple of years have put us back into the preclinical space. And that's by intent. We know that we need to get into that space and get that going early, or else the substrate is going to be gone by the time we're ready to act on it. So I think that trend is going to continue.
I might leverage off the comments to say that in the last 15 months or so, with the public markets being as vibrant as they are for biotechs, part of the perspective from a buyer is that valuations are quite high for biotech in general. The biotech indices are up 60-80% over that time period. And so a lot of those companies that were smaller organizations 12 to 15 months ago now have significant market caps and are in the position where they're buying. And so that I think that is representative of the fact that late stage assets are highly valued. Late stage rare disease assets are highly valued, and so that's in a way driven organizations to look earlier, to look more to innovation, where there's greater opportunity for value creation through deals. We have the good fortune, I'm sure like Pfizer, to be able to look at the early stage opportunities as well as late stage and commercial assets and find the ones that best meet our criteria and our strategies and are most compelling. But yeah, the market dynamic is certainly adding to kind of the trend in partnering that Now, there are a lot of potential buyers out there that have significant amount of capital. Tom's company is a fairly new one, but it's been very successful in raising capital over the last couple of years, which is fantastic from our standpoint, in that there's a lot of rare disease oriented innovative research happening. So in time, there's more opportunities for us to have great therapeutics. So I think it's a good thing.
Great. I think we're probably out of time, but I want to look at the audience and see if there's perhaps one burning question that someone wants to ask the panel to address. And if not, we'll adjourn and go to the break. Anyone? Great. Oh, sorry, I didn't see one. Okay.
Hi, my name is Kelly Foster with the Mastocytosis Society, and I have a question. Just maybe you guys just help steer in the right direction. I'm trying to raise awareness, so if anybody can help me. Right now, there's a medication that's available within Europe and Canada, but not in the U.S., and the company that makes it is not interested in bringing it to the U.S., and I'm looking for options. Right now, I'm doing personal importation, but it was started out with myself, and then my daughter and myself, because we both have it, and now we're up to 60 some of my patients that are importing it.
Anyone want to tackle that?
I was going to say, I'll give you my business card afterwards and we'll talk. But yeah, I think it's a problem we hear about, but it's certainly something that, as a company, I would like to hear about that situation. I wasn't aware of that, but even if there's some, it's at least worth a conversation. I know those are challenging, but I think sometimes for smaller companies in particular, there may be a way to help or get involved. So maybe we could talk afterwards or give you my contact.
Great. Thanks very much.